Well, thanks very much for joining us tonight. Thanks for your introduction, Gavin. Tonight's talk is part of History Hub Ulster celebrations of the 100th centenary of Northern Ireland. And this is, as Gavin has mentioned, a selection of headstones. Actually, it should have been a selection of graves because a number of the headstones are unmarked, of victims of the 1920s Troubles. So I first became aware of the 1920s Troubles on one of my numerous wanders around the cemeteries, and this headstone is in Dundonald Cemetery, and it's I'll be mentioning it in more detail later on, but it's the final resting place of Richard Graham, and it says in his headstone, he was killed by a bomb on tram in Royal Avenue, 24th of November 1921. So I thought to myself, what would somebody be doing throwing a bomb onto a tram in Belfast in 1921? And it, of course, was part of the Troubles of the 1920s Troubles, I subsequently found out. So then in the days when you could go along to your local library, I went to the library and got this book out, Alan Parkinson's Belfast's Unholy War. It talks about the Troubles of the 1920s just in Belfast, because that was sadly the epicenter of the Troubles. So it's been an invaluable help in the compilation of this talk. So another source of information about the 1920s Troubles is Tom Hartley's book on Milltown Cemetery, and at the back of it, it lists the victims of the 1920s Troubles. So he defines the 1920s Troubles as widespread political and communal conflict surrounding the partition of Ireland that led to the deaths of more than 518 people between 21st of July 1920 and December 1922. Winston Churchill described Belfast at that time as an underworld with deadly passions of its own. So it's often referred to, especially in nationalist circles, as a pogrom, but according to Parkinson, some of the more obvious features of a pogrom did occur, including a disproportionately high number of Catholic victims of violence. But the term is imperfect and unhelpful in explaining the events of this period, as there were also hundreds of Protestant dead and injured. So the talk will feature 20 graves, as is the norm these days, and a number of them, as I mentioned, are without headstones, and they're in a variety of locations, but focusing on the Belfast City Cemetery, Milltown, Dundonald, but also features headstones in Cumber New Cemetery, Carrick, Victoria, Kilroot, Drumcree, Cornmoney, and there's even a mention of Lowslawn. So before I start, I will say that there are images. There's an image of a number of dead bodies, and there is upsetting detail in some of the entries. So we'll try to flag those up before we come to it. So the first one then, as I mentioned earlier, a number of these graves don't feature a headstone. So this is the first one. This was an early victim of the 1920s Troubles. This is William Henry Dunning, and he was shot dead on the 22nd of July 1920. So he is an unmarked grave. So his grave is reference P419 in the Glenalina section, in other words, the upper section of the city cemetery. So when I went searching for his grave, then I was able to find section P, which is in the photograph there, and then I found the two Commonwealth War graves. They are P416 and P417. So then I knew that William Henry Dunning's final resting place was two along from that in P419. So Dunning was a 23-year-old labourer from 5676 Bellevue Street, Shankill Road. He previously served with the 9th Battalion Royal Irish Rifles. As I mentioned earlier, he was shot dead on the 22nd of July 1920 in the vicinity of Cooper Street and Cashmere Road. Around that in less than 24 hours from the 22nd of July 1920, 18 people, 3 women and 15 men were shot dead in that the initial outbreak of violence. So that's the first one. The second one is also in the city cemetery, also unmarked. So it's essentially between those 2 big trees there. That was the final resting place of Nellie McGregor. On the 24th of July 1920, Nellie, who was 20 and living at 30 Froome Street, was walking towards the city centre with a friend, Samuel Faulkner, from D Street, both in the lower Newtownards Road. Discovering a, quote, great commotion in and around Bryson Street, unquote, they debated as to whether to continue their journey. The army were then given the order to open fire on a loyalist mob. Samuel threw Nellie to the ground, and following a break in the gunfire, they stood up to leave. Just then, a military volley came from the direction of Bryson Street, striking Nellie, who died from her wounds in the Royal Victoria Hospital the next day. She's buried in grave F2311, the city cemetery, but it's now unmarked. This man here is buried in Roselawn, and you'll see he died, Charles Murray died on the 8th of February 2012. He contributed a book called Ulster Voices, Memory of Ulster People. He was born at 38 Ribble Street in 1909, and he well recalled Nellie's murder. He would have been aged 11. Say Charles himself died in 2012, so aged 103. So it's interesting to think that all those years later, Charles could still remember Nellie's sad death. And it's also very, very sad that the grave is totally unmarked. So the next one is James McMinn. He was killed along with Alexander Harrison on the 25th of September 1921, so into the next year. And he's also buried in Belfast City Cemetery in the Glen Elena section. So his grave is immediately in the foreground there. In other words, there is a reference on that headstone to up, but you have to again march it out because it's an unmarked grave. James McMinn was killed along with Alexander Harrison from an explosion on tram lines at Wolf Street in the Newtownards Road during street disturbances. Unionist papers reported that the bomb was lobbed from the Short Strand into a loyalist mob, with the Irish News reporting that the bomb had been thrown in by an invading force, to quote, of loyalists, and having failed to explode, was returned by nationalists. It is reported that the nationalists cheered when they heard the bomb explode. So McMinn lived in 8 Reed's Place and was 16 when he died. Harrison, he's buried to the extreme right of this photograph, in other words, 3 up to the right from the Commonwealth War grave, and he was living in Fraser Street, and he was 19 when he was killed in the same incident at the junction of the Wolf Street and the lower Newtownards Road. Wolf Street is now totally gone, although there is a Wolf Place. So the next one then is this is Dundonald Cemetery. This is John Orr. He was a 32-year-old and he lived at Derwent Street, again on the lower Newtownards Road, and he was killed by gunfire from the Falls area towards Donegal Road on the 20th of September 1921 during the funeral cortege for James McMinn and Alexander Harrison. In other words, the 2 guys that I mentioned there earlier, as the mourners made their way to Belfast City Cemetery. So 3 other mourners were also wounded. So this is one of the only person, thankfully, that I can see that was killed as a result of the attack on the funeral cortege of James McMinn and Alexander Harrison. So he was buried only 3 days after he attended the funeral of his friends, I would imagine.
So that grave in the Donald Cemetery, as I say, it got quite overgrown, so I tidied it up, and you're able to see it now a bit clearer. And at the bottom of it, then it says, "Thy will be done." It's still under trees a little bit, but it's certainly a bit clearer than it used to be. So down to Cumber in the county of Down for the next one, and that is this one. It's Cumber New Cemetery, and it commemorates the second name there is James Rogers, and he died the 22nd of November 1921. So I'm trying to run through them in chronological order. For Davy, that means in date order. So James was the age 18 and working at Workman Clark, the shipyard, when he died during a bomb and gun attack on the tram Corporation Street. He was the son of a recently widowed RIC, Royal Irish Constabulary Sergeant. Also killed during the attack were William Carnduff, 40, also from Cumber, and Robert Nesbitt, 17, of Josephine Street in Belfast. The Northern Whig newspaper described the attack as an outrage comparable in its unspeakable atrocity with the worst that has been committed in various continental countries by nihilists and other enemies of mankind. So say that's in Cumber New Cemetery. It could be that William Carnduff, because he's from Cumber, he was from Cumber, could also be buried in Cumber New Cemetery. The next one is back to Dundonald, and you can maybe see there in the middle, commemorates Andrew Patton, who died from gunshot wounds received on the Newtonards Road on the 23rd of November 1921, aged 32 years. Andrew Patton had a distinguished war record, and he lived from the Great War, obviously, and he lived at 93 Saunders Street, and he died from his injuries at the Royal Victoria Hospital. The headstone, as you might be able to see there, also commemorates his little son, Robert Bailey Patton, died 28th of June 1923. So in other words, 2 years later, and he was only aged 2 years and 3 months. And then Charles Patton, who died at Belfast City Hospital on 22nd of March 1932, aged 20. Both whilst also recorded living at 93 Saunders Street. Quite a lot of heartache on that headstone. The next one is still in Dundonald, and this is the one I mentioned there earlier, Richard Graham, who was killed by a bomb on a tram in Royal Avenue, 24th of November 1921, aged 45. Richard lived at 38 Beverley Street in Belfast, and he was on board a shipyard workers' tram bound for the Shankill Road, which was targeted by Republican bombers lurking outside a shipping office at the junction of Royal Avenue and Berry Street. A bomb thrown on board killed 4 men, all middle-aged breadwinners, including Richard, a foreman at Harlan Wolff. The bomb also injured almost 30 other people. The crowded nature of the tram limited fatalities, with the blast confined to a small radius. Richard's wife, Isabella Gawley, died aged 64 at the Royal Victoria Hospital, whilst registered as living at 19 Sandymount Street in Belfast on the 17th of June 1942. The headstone sadly also commemorates their daughter Elizabeth, who died in infancy and was interred in City Cemetery. I need to go back up to that headstone sometime and try to get rid of the growth behind it. So also killed in that same incident when the bomb was thrown into a tram is this gentleman, and it's Robert Gilbert Johnson. And I have to thank Mark Doherty for sending me that photograph. He is buried down in, well, I don't have to, but I'm choosing to. He is buried down in Kilroot, outside Carrick. And you'll see there about the middle also Robert Gilbert Johnston, who died 26th of November 1921 as a result of bomb outrage in Royal Avenue, Belfast. So he died of his injuries 2 days after Richard Graham died on the 24th of November. And again, sadly, that headstone also commemorates his 2 children who died in infancy. So that's Kilroot with
Robert Gilbert Johnson. Then a bit further towards Belfast, then for the next one, that's Carrick, Victoria Cemetery, and I have to thank Ricky Cole for this photograph. As you can see, Ricky has worked in this grave because he's left his thingy, I think is the technical term, his rake beside the headstone there to the right, and it commemorates, this headstone in Carrick Victoria Cemetery commemorates Francis Alexander Hill, RIC, Royal Irish Constabulary, who died 19th of January 1922 as a result of wounds received in the execution of his duty, aged 31 years. Constable Hill was a native of County Leitrim and he had 12 years service. At the time of his death. On the 27th of December 1921, he was commanding as patrol of special constables on patrol on the Old Park Road in Belfast when they saw a suspicious group of men at the corner of Grace Hill Street. Gunfire was exchanged and Constable Hill was hit, dying in a military hospital more than 3 weeks later. So the incident, as I say, took place on the 27th of December 1921, but Constable Hill only succumbed to his injuries on the 19th of January 1922. So the next one then is in the Milltown Cemetery in Belfast for the first time on this occasion, and that is Patrick Lamb. And Patrick was 53 and he managed the Blacksmith's Arms pub in York Street, and he managed it for more than 20 years. He was shot dead on the 13th of February 1922 by several armed men who stormed his premises, as I say, in February 1922. So you can just see to the left of the photograph, you can just see the main entrance to the Milltown Cemetery. So that gives you some idea of where that headstone is. In other words, very close to the main entrance. So the next, out of the next 3 slides, next 4 slides, 3 of them are also in Milltown. This is the next one. This is Christy Clark. You can see that headstone has been vandalised, as I believe it has been on a number of occasions over the years. Christy Clark was a member of the RIC and he was returning from the funerals of colleagues James Cullen, 23, and Patrick O'Connor, 35. They had both been shot in the back by IRA gunmen when patrolling the Falls Road on the 10th of March. On the 13th of March 1922, Clark and a Constable Caldwell were attacked by a large group of men near the Beehive Bar at Mulholland Terrace in the Falls Road. Despite allegedly wearing a bulletproof vest, Christy Clark was killed instantly. Constable Caldwell, although injured, returned fire with a civilian, Daniel Rogers, who was a dog racing official at Celtic Park, and he lived at Grosvenor Road, dying from crossfire during the attack. 41-year-old Clark was allegedly a member of what's called the Nixon Gang, and I'll mention them shortly. Mention the Nixon Gang shortly. The next one contains, well, so the next one is the McMahon grave headstone, sorry, and plot. So it's the headstone. It's the photograph after this. This is a bit contains an image of the McMahon family dead, sadly. So you can see there on the left is the McMahon plot, and then the close-up of the headstone says, erected by Elizabeth McMahon in sad and loving memory of her family who were brutally murdered in their home 24th of March 1922. Was her husband Owen, aged 55 years, her sons Bernard, Joseph, aged 26, and Francis, aged 24 years, Patrick, aged 22 years, and Thomas Gerald,
aged 15 years. Also their trusted servant, Edward McKinney, who was murdered with above, aged 26 years, and was interred in Buncrana. On whose soul, sweet Jesus, have mercy, it says at the base of the headstone. So this incident occurred. This is a notorious incident in Belfast, and certainly I think if there was one incident known in the 1920s Troubles in Belfast, this would be it. On the 24th of March 1922, 6 Catholic civilians were shot dead at the home of the McMahon family in Belfast. Gunmen broke into their house at night and shot all 8 males inside, killing businessman Owen McMahon, 4 of his sons, and one of his employees. 2 others were shot but survived, and a female family member was assaulted. The survivor said that most of the gunmen wore police uniforms, and it is suspected that they were members of the Ulster Special Constabulary and also the Nixon gang. The youngest McMahon's son, 12-year-old Michael, survived the attack by hiding behind furniture and pretending to be hit, whilst John McMahon, 30, survived despite serious gunshot wounds. So the next image contains a photo of each of their bodies. So that's it to the right. And to the left then is Owen McMahon himself. He was one of Belfast's wealthiest publicans and a director of Glentoran Football Club. Whilst not, he owned the Great Eastern Bar, which is in the New North Road, just at the junction of D Street. Whilst not overly political, he was a friend of Joe Devlin and was therefore seen as a prestige target by loyalist elements at that time. So sadly, that's Owen in the middle there, along with the 4 other members of the McMahon family. Just awful. So this is into the Dundonald Cemetery now. This is not a fatality, sadly, from the 1920s Troubles. This is the man Nixon, John W. Nixon, and you can see there it says in full uniform, and he was the man who's alleged to have perpetrated an awful lot of atrocities, including the McMahon murders. So that's in Dundonald Cemetery. You see he only passed away in 1949. So the next one then, again, is in Dundonald, and this is the Donnelly family. This is another particularly sad one that I saw a while ago when I was walking around Dundonald Cemetery. You can see there, late of 29 Brown Street, in memory of my dear parents, in memory of their sons, Francis, who died 31st of March 1922, and Joseph died 5th of April 1922. Francis was aged only 2, and Joseph aged 12 when they died after a bomb was thrown through the front window of their home, as it says there at 29 Brown Street on the 31st of March 1922. 2-year-old Francis, who was killed immediately, was described by a neighbour as the flower of the flock, whilst Joseph had been preparing a meal when the bomb exploded. The Belfast Telegraph stated that upstairs lies the father, weeping like a child at the thought of the terrible destruction of his home and habitation and of the awful slaughter of his children. So the grave also contains the remains of Francis Sr., who died on the 2nd of April 1924, aged 36, his wife Eliza Jane, who died at Belfast City Hospital on the 27th of July 1925, aged 33, and another son, George, who also died at Belfast City Hospital on 15th of October 1927, aged 13. That meant that the entire Donnelly family had died within the space of 5 years following the traumatic deaths of Francis and Joseph. A plaque on the grave, it doesn't feature in this photograph, reads, "Dearly beloved," it contains a Bible verse, Romans chapter 12, verse 19. It says, "Dearly beloved, avenge not yourselves, but rather give place unto wrath, for it is written, vengeance is mine, I will repay, saith the Lord." So
That's the Bible verse at the bottom of the grave. The next one also contains, it's not a particularly upsetting image, it's only of a headstone, but it's the detail which is particularly upsetting. This is the Walsh grave, again in Milltown, and again you can see the Falls Road bus depot, just that blue building over to the right, so that gives you some idea. Again, that's quite close to the entrance of Milltown. On the 1st of April 1922, a murder gang, possibly supported by Nixon, broke down the door to the Walsh house in Arnon Street and rushed upstairs, where they found ex-soldier Walsh in bed with his 7-year-old son Michael and 2-year-old daughter Bridget. In a frenzied attack, the gang repeatedly used a sledgehammer to kill the father, whilst Michael died from 3 bullet wounds the following day. This is a particularly bad bit. A priest discovered Joseph after the attack with his, to quote, with his skull open and empty, while the whole mass of his brains lay on the bed about a foot away. And they're both Joseph and Michael are commemorated on the headstone. It's quite hard to see, but as martyred for their faith, martyred for his faith, sorry. So that's quite a common expression in Troubles fatalities, whether it's the 1920s Troubles or the more recent Troubles. So they were living, as I say, in Arnon Street. Just prior to that, Mr. Walsh's neighbour, William Spallon, he was age 70, and he lived at 16 Arnon Street. Earlier in the day, he had buried his wife. The same gang forced entry into the property, asked Mr. Spallon to identify himself, and then shot him 3 times before stealing £20, which was nearby, which Mr. Spallon was going to use to settle up his late wife's funeral expenses. So that poor man, Mr. Spallon, I don't know where he's buried, but I would imagine Milltown, but he was murdered on the same day that he buried his own wife, so doesn't bear thinking about. So the next one is back into Dundonald, and it is the Patterson grave. And on the headstone there, it's hard to see, but it says murdered at Belfast, 19th May 1922. On that day, a 9-strong IRA gang entered Garrett's Cooperage in Little Patrick Street in Belfast during the mid-afternoon. They ordered Protestant workers to one side and shot 4 of them, 3 of them fatally, including William. He was an ex-soldier and he lived at 76 Fraser Street, again the lower Newtownards Road. He was shot in the head and he died in the Mater Hospital, aged 38. So you can see there the family themselves have tidied up that grave. They've put that stone on it, but they've also put this little plaque on it, and it's sadly letting in water, but it contains a couple of images on it. The image on the top I'm going to show you shortly, and then the image bottom right. It is an article which is kept now in the Linen Hall Library. So they've been working with the Linen Hall Library and Jason Burke quite closely, sorry. So this is the image of the family. I'm not sure if that's William there at the back with a tie on, or if it's his eldest boy, but that's certainly William's wife sitting there in the middle, and you can see a lot of the children there. So they were all those children were orphaned as a result of their father's murder in May 22. And I met the family up at the grave one time just coincidentally, and so they let me take a photograph of that photograph. So this is the next one, and I have to give a shout out to Gillian McCabe here, because she provided the photograph that I'll show shortly. Mary Donaldson, that you can see there, she's recorded the beloved wife of William J. Donaldson, who died, and Mary died 19th of May 1922. She was caught in crossfire between the army and the nationalist snipers in North Queen Street, whilst outside the door of her home at 220 Spamount Street in Belfast. Mary died of her injuries at the Royal Victoria Hospital on the 19th of May 1922, in other words the same day, aged 48. So Gillian, through her husband Brian, has given me this striking photograph of Mary, who sadly died as a result of being shot during the Troubles. The next one then is a name that people might recognize. So you'll see there at the bottom, at the base of the headstone, this is in Drumcree, outside on the Gervackie Road in Portadown. You can see there it commemorates William John Tweddell, MP JP, who was foully assassinated in Belfast on May 22nd, 1922, in the 49th year of his age. Tweddell owned a draper's business in Belfast, and he was an Ulster Unionist Party member of Belfast City Council, and from 1910. In November 1921, he and Robert Boyd organised the Ulster Imperial Guards as a paramilitary force of 21,000 men. He was elected to the Parliament of Northern Ireland for Belfast West from the general election of 1921 until he was assassinated on the 22nd of May 1922 by the IRA. He was walking in Garfield Street off Royal Avenue to his business a short distance away and was closely followed by his assassins. His death, he was shot in the back. His death precipitated a clampdown on the IRA and 350 members were interred. Nobody was ever convicted, however, of Tweddell's murder. So he was living at Nashville at 54 Malone Park, certainly at Des Reyes, and Tweddell Avenue was subsequently named in William John Tweddell MP's honour. So sadly, Tweddell Avenue is no stranger to trouble over the most recent Troubles. Only 2 more to go. And thanks to Gavin for this photograph, and Bamford for this photograph. And this is in Cornmoney Cemetery. So you'll see in lovely memory of Grace M. Todd, who died from the result of bomb splinter wounds, 20th of May 1922. She was aged 30, Grace was, and she lived at the Dag Street in Belfast, and she died from chest and leg injuries when a bomb exploded on the tram on which she was travelling along North Street in Belfast on the 24th of May 1922. Other bombs exploded on trams in Upper Donegal Street and Clifton Street on the same date, thankfully with no other casualties in either case. So the last headstone then is this one, and this is particularly another sad one. This is Henry Little. Again, this is in Donald, but in memory of Henry Little, the beloved husband of Elizabeth Little, who gave his life for a neighbour on the 19th of July 1922. Sorry, 10th of July. He died at 30 Bramcott Street, and he was living at 26 Bramcott Street. He was shot dead in a struggle as he tried to intervene on behalf of Catholic neighbours who were being evicted. And Henry appears to be the only burial in that grave. So Bramcott Street is off the Bloomfield Avenue, where all the best people lived, where my granny and grand used to live, and my mum, if she could be bothered tuning in. So to summarise then, the summary of Alan Parkinson's books states, as 1922 drew to a conclusion, the chances of renewed sectarian violence had all but evaporated. A combination of the effects of the special powers legislation and the increasing security grip enjoyed by the new police force and the Ulster Special Constabulary, the onset of civil war in the rest of Ireland, the dip in the morale of the Northern Republicans and their migration south to participate in the Civil War, and the Northern administration's tougher stance against loyalist terror gangs meant that the initiative swung back into the hands of the security forces. That's what Alan Parkinson takes for the reasons why the Troubles ended. But sadly, in the interim, in less than two and a half years, more than 500 people had lost their lives. So quite often we say about lest we forget, but I think that we have certainly forgotten these Troubles victims, and I'm as guilty as anyone. So I just think it's a shame that these people, a lot of them who died 100 years ago exactly, and are on unmarked graves, and their death is not really recognised that much. So hopefully this has played a little bit, done that a little bit, and has remembered those people. So as is customary in these presentations, I have to do a shameless plug. So that's my next book, and it's called 2020, and you can see at the base there, there's 20 graves in each of 20 different local cemeteries. So I sent a first proof of it to the printers on Saturday night. So that's how rock and roll I am, and these days, and so hopefully that'll be about before 2021 ends. Well, folks, thanks very much. Your suffering has now ended.